Good morning. My name is Ron Leith. I haven't done this in a while. But a couple of things happened during the past few months. One is Donald Trump got reelected President of the United States. And he's instituted a lot of changes. Some people approve of and some don't. One of the changes is with regard to immigration. He's set up a system where illegal immigrants were being detained and exported out of the country. And there have been several sites, detention sites, set up around the United States. One of them is the Bishop Whipple building in Minnesota. Located at the Fort Snelling Federal Reserve between St. Paul and Minneapolis. Now, Fort Snelling has a long history, going back before the establishment of Minnesota itself, actually. And just to let you know, maybe I said this before, maybe not. I am Bideo Kantawan Dakota, or Sioux, and Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Chippewa, what have you. So my family lineage goes to both major tribal groups in the state of Minnesota. And Fort Snelling, of course, has an association with the Dakota tribes in Minnesota. And one of the eras where there's a relationship is before and after the Dakota conflict of 1862. The governor of Minnesota and legislature, or general public, non-Indian public rather, decided to expel all Dakota people from Minnesota after the Dakota conflict of 1862. As a part of this expulsion, they established an internment camp after the war was over. Basically, the war ended in December of 1862. And the internment camp was established in early 1863. Of course, one of the major events of the conflict itself was the hanging of the 38 Dakota in Mankato, Minnesota. Those individuals who were sentenced by the United States Army, and that sentence was approved by Abraham Lincoln, the largest mass hanging in the history of the country, even to this day. Those Dakotas that were remaining in the state were basically rounded up, put into an internment camp at Fort Snelling. There's one picture that's prominent. If you look at the history of the state, and this picture shows maybe 75, 100 teepees, all set up within this enclosure, this internment camp. There are several stories about that camp and the people that live there, but I'll tell you one. Of course, Dakota tradition is oral history, family history, traditional history. It's all, it was pretty much oral. And one of the stories that came out, passed down through different generations of families, including mine, was that when a person passed away, died in the camp, the family would bury the person underground in the teepee. One of the reasons, of course, is because they were all prisoners. They were interned. They were waiting to be transported to Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, wherever. Canada. Some of them went to Canada, Montana. Minnesota was trying to empty the state of Dakota people. Some of them got to stay. That's another story, though. I can talk more about that at another time. But those that were buried at Fort Snelling in this internment camp, their relatives kept their identities concealed. So there is really no record of when they died, what their life was like, or who they were, because the Dakota Nation and the United States were still basically at war. So now, to jump ahead a little bit, the Bishop Whipple building Bishop Whipple, if you look at his history, he had a long relationship with Dakota people in Minnesota. Anyway, the federal government constructed this building about maybe a mile or so away from the fort, the actual fort that is Fort Snelling. They constructed this building and they called it the Bishop Whipple Federal Building. And when the Homeland Security started rounding up quote unquote illegal immigrants in the state of Minnesota, they started shipping them to this Whipple building, this facility. And today, February 3rd, 2025, they're still doing it. People are being detained, arrested, detained, and released, apparently, in the middle of the night. And it's February 2026. So there's a lot of activity there, plus a lot of the immigration officers that are called ICE, they work out of this building. And citizens from the state of Minnesota have been holding protests at the building for weeks now. But one of the things that hasn't really come to the surface, because a lot of people aren't aware of how certain legal elements are tied together, and that includes me. Because of the burials at Fort Snelling, undocumented, the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act should come into play. NAGPRA, NAGPRA, it's called. Several instances of grave location and repatriation and protection have taken place in the state of Minnesota under this federal act, NAGPRA. And there was a guy at the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council by the name of Jim Jones, who was sort of the coordinator of these instances, these events of repatriation. And I don't really have any information on whether the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council knows or has any information about the relationship between Fort Snelling, NAGPRA, 1863 burials, and the Bishop Whipple building and all that. I don't know. I'm not really in touch with the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council or anyone involved in TIPO, Tribal Historical Information Office. There are several TIPOs in the state. I think every tribe has a TIPO, which basically does the same kind of work. And it took me a while to kind of think about this because the Whipple building is about a mile, I think, from the fort itself, and the internment camp was down on the riverbed area. And we know that because not only our own ancestral information, but Minnesota historical information also confirms that that's where it was. And several traditionalists, Dakota and other tribal spiritual leaders, have conducted ceremonies in the internment camp area. So the tribes are aware that that's where the internment camp was at. Of course, the internment camp was emptied in 1863, and the Dakotas that were living there and dying there were shipped out to different parts of the country, Davenport, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, what have you. They were dispersed. So I thought, well, this is valuable information. And so what I did was I talked to one of the staff members at Minnesota Senator Tina Smith's office, and I shared that information with the staff member. Tina wasn't available that day. And I also shared the information with some other Dakota people who, have been involved in different activities over the years. And they both mentioned the fact that it wasn't really information that was well known, researched, or whether or not even if TIPO, Tribal Historical Information Office, was involved in doing some sort of review. I guess the bottom line is this. If there are Dakota remains in that area, does that or does that not involve NAGPRA or TIPO? And if it does it have any effect on the Bishop Whipple building and its construction? I'm not saying that the Whipple building is constructed on the graves, because I know that they're pretty far apart. But the Whipple building is built within the parameters of what is considered Fort Snelling, the federal landmarks. And it needs to be taken into account, because if there were activities taking place wherein an investigation by a NAGPRA officer or a TIP officer did not give a full review, then it's possible that NAGPRA, which is federal law, it's possible that NAGPRA has been violated. And if NAGPRA has been violated, then there's an opportunity there for a federal lawsuit. So that's all I'll say about that. I don't know when I'll post this. Maybe today or tomorrow. Post it on YouTube. But it's a serious issue to take into consideration. Again, my name is Ronald Ethan. I'm a member of the Red Lake Band of Chippewa. And I'm also a member of Lower Sioux because my father was an enrolled member of Lower Sioux. Although I'm not enrolled in Lower Sioux, I'm still a lineal descendant. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you. Have a good day.